Thank you. And I want to thank the Republican women, the Campbell County Republican women. Let's give everyone involved in this event a round of applause. Thank you to our sheriff's deputies here tonight. Really appreciate you being here. I know there's going to be, I think, vibrant questioning. I'm looking forward to it. I think there's three things I really want to impart tonight. First, just discussion a little bit about what our office does, so we're all on the same page. The Wyoming Secretary of State is the chief election official for the state of Wyoming. That has been since territorial days. It's laid out in state law. It's also laid out in the Constitution. We also do all the business registrations for the state of Wyoming on behalf of the citizens of the state of Wyoming, which is a big part of the job. It is quite a revenue center for the state. We can talk more about that. We're taking on fraud there. That has been one of the things that I've tried to emphasize to the Wyoming Secretary of State. Also, the Secretary of State serves as the chief securities official for the state of Wyoming. So we oversee stockbrokers, broker-dealers, investment advisors. And then we sit on a number of state boards that are in the state constitution with the other four statewide electeds. One of those being the State Board of Land Commissioners, which oversees and manages lands held by the state, and then also the State Loan and Investment Board, which provides lending authority to cities, towns, counties, political subdivisions of the state, you name it. Also, the Secretary of State serves as the Lieutenant Governor of the state, so when the governor's out of state or something happens, it actually just happened because the governor was abroad for a week, the Secretary of State serves in the governor's absence. Now, it's a very exciting time in Wyoming and our country, and as we approach the 2026 election, I think Wyoming is at a pivotal point. Now, let's talk a little bit about what President Trump is doing. 100 days in the books. And this is not just a 100-day press release. I mean, this is a tome. All the things that this administration has accomplished. President Trump has been so prepared, doing great work with these executive orders, and we're working with him on the coal executive orders, the election integrity executive orders. That is exciting. At the state level, we see the Freedom Caucus in the State House taking a majority. And that is something that when I entered the state legislature, I served for 6 years in the State House before running for Secretary of State. So before going into the executive branch, I was a state legislator. And when we got there in 2017, I'll never forget it. I mean, there were 60 members. We were meeting at this office building, the Jonah building, because the Capitol was being redone. And we really only had 6, 7 people that were consistently conservative. And we'd meet weekly and share pizza or eat occasionally together, discuss issues. And then in 2018, we grew to 12. And then in 2020, we grew to 18. And then in 2022, we grew to 26. And in 2024 now, we have 35, 36 members in that 62-member House. In the redistricting, the House grew to 62 in 2022. So we have a true conservative majority in the Wyoming House. And that is something that we should really tout and be proud of. And we are really hitting the ground running in this 25 session with what we accomplished. I launched on our election integrity side an election integrity vision with 10 planks. And the first was proof of citizenship and proof of residency for voting, which we did get through this process, and we became the first state in the nation. I know the media doesn't want to admit it. It's the coalition, right, of the insiders, the media, and the Democrats that we're up against here in our conservative movement. We have the people on our side, but we have a lot of structural challenges in this, what I call the troika. The media, the insider money, the big money, the insiders that have been in office for a long time, and the Democrats. But we were the first in the nation to pass this proof of citizenship bill for all races. And Representative Baer was the lead on that. He did a great job on it. It really ended a year-and-a-half standoff with the governor on this issue. We went in late 2023, we launched a rulemaking to require proof of residency for registering to vote. and to create procedures to stop illegal aliens from voting. And Hamilton County in 2020 actually there was an illegal alien that voted here. And we identified that when we entered office. Obviously, we were in office in 2020. The clerk ended up removing that individual from the rolls. But this is a real issue that over 90% of Americans support. Now, every time I say something, she pops up that sign. In late 2023, we launched a rulemaking with the governor saying, look, we're going to require a proof of residency for registering to vote, and we're going to create basic procedures to stop illegal aliens from voting. And amazingly, this weak insider governor once again failed us, and he vetoed that rulemaking in early 2024. It was April 12, 2024. So we didn't have it in place in the 2024 election. Literally, as this governor handed me the veto of our rulemaking, President Trump was having a press conference with Speaker Johnson at Mar-a-Lago announcing the SAVE Act, which is proof of citizenship for registering to vote at the federal level. Basically codifying at the federal level what we're doing, what we got done with House Bill 156, with Representative Bear being the lead on it at the state level in this session. And literally, I mean, think about that juxtaposition. As he is vetoing that rulemaking, he's announcing the SAVE Act. President Trump is announcing the SAVE Act at the federal level. So just to show the dichotomy between our Make America Great Again conservative majority and insiders like this Mark Gordon, we saw it in the debate on proof of citizenship and proof of residency for registering to vote. But we said, look, we're going to go to the legislature. We're not going to back down. We're not going to take the inaccurate statements that he made in his veto message. And Representative Bear ran that bill. It was a fight to the finish. But it went through both sides of the legislature with veto-proof majorities. And the governor ended up backing down. Even though he didn't sign the bill, he did not veto it. And the founders of our state, of course, were very prescient in writing into our state constitution that no pocket vetoes would be allowed. That if the governor failed to veto a bill, that it would become law without his signature. So he couldn't just fail to sign the bill and the bill would go away. That becomes law without his signature after a specified period of time. So that was a huge moment for our state. We also got a ban on ranked choice voting done. So this ranked choice voting is a scheme by the radical left. And we just saw Abe Hamadeh here yesterday announce that he's going to try to bring a ban on ranked choice voting at the federal level. It's great to see the codifications of what we are doing at the state level at the federal level. I really think it solidifies and it shows that what we're doing, that we're becoming a leader in Wyoming. You know, so often the insiders have caused us to fall behind in terms of advancing conservative policy. But with this conservative vision that we've worked with the House majority to bring forward, we really moved the ball on that, on banning ranked choice voting, on banning foreign funding of elections. There was a loophole in federal law that allowed foreign funding of ballot initiatives and ballot measures. And this is not a lie. Soros actually funded a number of left-wing ballot measures in Michigan, in Ohio, in other states, and that's all because of that loophole that was put in place by the Federal Election Commission. And so what we've been trying to do state by state is to close that loophole by banning federal funding of ballot initiatives, foreign funding of ballot initiatives at the state level. And that closes that loophole that the feds put into place. We also put into place a durational residency requirement for registering to vote. This is unbelievable. The left sometimes, you think about, and we have a lot of aficionados of our Constitution here. Our Constitution had a 1-year residency requirement for registering to vote in it. And in a series of court cases in the early 1970s, that requirement was invalidated by the federal Supreme Court and the state Supreme Court here. Now, since then, it's been 50 years, the legislature has declined to act in terms of specifying a period of time that somebody would have to live here in order to register to vote that would survive constitutional scrutiny. And so that led to the fact that somebody could have been here 10 seconds under the former law. Luckily, it's changing on July 1st. and register to vote. And that was very troubling to me. The idea that Soros or Hans-Jörg Wyss or any of these woke billionaires could bust somebody in and they could sign the attestation saying that, yeah, I've been here 10 seconds, I qualify with the other provisions in law required for registering to vote, and do not pass go, they would have been able to register to vote. So that's why we put into place that 30-day period that somebody would need to be here in order to register to vote. I know, I'd like it to be stronger. I agree with you. I know hunting, we'd like to align it with that, but unfortunately, the strongest that has survived constitutional scrutiny is 30 days. And so, it's either that or nothing, and I don't want nothing, because then you can have somebody bust in the day of, and they can vote. We also tightened up our voter list maintenance. I always talk about voter list hygiene. It's just like oral hygiene. You got to brush your teeth twice a day. We got to do voter list hygiene twice a day. And so we passed a number of statutory provisions that strengthened our voter list maintenance procedures, where frankly our state had fallen quite behind. One of them is allowing us to apply to what's called the SAVE system at the federal level, which is a system that we can use to help us identify illegal aliens at the time of registration, so we can stop that illegal registration.
Extraterrestrial.
That was House Bill 318. There's more we want to get done on voter list maintenance. So 60%, 6 of our 10 planks on our election integrity vision passed in the 2025 general session. Now, 4 of them did not. And we're going to be I'm so excited working with Chairman Knapp on Joint Corporations Committee. We got a meeting next week in Lander. The work is not stopping. I'll tell you, every day I tell our guys, we're moving forward 3 yards, at least. Every single day, at least. And the headline today, do you see this, Chris? They go, lawmakers, Gray, continuing to harp on election integrity. That was the headline in the Jackson Hole News and Guide today.
Truth.
I mean, these people are just... And then the Gillette News record, they just copy and paste it. You notice they syndicate now each other, and so they'll copy and paste the story from Jackson in the Gillette paper, and you'll notice it because right under the byline it says where it's from.
Where's the task force for that?
Really troubling the direction of the media in that respect. But there were 4 bills. Now, all of the bills that failed, we got all 10 of our priorities through the House. But in the Senate, unfortunately, there was a challenge with getting these bills through the leadership. Now, the committee treated us very well over there. I told Chairman Case, who I've had a lot of run-ins over the years with, to his face, that I appreciated, I'll give credit where it's due, and that the Corporations Committee on the Senate side was very good to us. It was really with the leadership, particularly the Senate President, Bo Biteman, and the Majority Floor Leader, Tara Nethercott, where a few of our bills were held. One of them was pen-to-paper ballots, which, it's in the executive order. All these people that said that we were, out of control and simply asking for pen-to-paper ballots. Now, I know here in Campbell County, I still live, I'm from Natrona County, the default method of voting was just like it is here, where it's a pen-to-paper ballot. And that is what we want. In Laramie County, which is where 18 to 19% of the votes are cast, it's our largest county, the default method of voting is actually a touch screen that prints out a piece of paper. But the piece of paper, while it has names on it, it's the barcodes on top that cast the ballot. And so the clerks always repeat over and over again that, the names are on the piece of paper. Well, I ask them, when you put it into the tabulator, what's casting the ballot? And they go silent. Because it's the barcodes. And so it's a pretty simple distinction on why that's problematic, because none of us can read barcode. I don't know, maybe C-3PO, if we had C-3PO with us, maybe he'd be able to read barcode, but I can't read barcode. So I go to cast my vote down in Laramie County. And I'm 35 years old. I've cast votes, since I'm 18, I guess we're 20, 25, 30 times. Casting a vote on a touchscreen was the most unsatisfying experience of my life in voting, because it printed out this piece of paper and the names didn't matter. It was these 12 barcodes on top that I couldn't read. Now, if you do, in every county has what's called express vote machines. So some people opt into them, but Laramie County is the only one that has the default method of voting, the touchscreen. And we want to make it so that every single county, the default method of voting is the pen to paper ballots. It's pretty basic. It was very troubling that the Senate President refused to refer that bill out of his desk. He had another vehicle that he said, that had been watered down that he wanted, that didn't go anywhere over in the House because it didn't do anything. And so that was a bill, House Bill 245, that Representative Knapp brought. Great job, and we're gonna ask the Joint Corporations Committee next week to take it up again. Another bill that failed that we're hoping to bring through in the periods in between sessions, which is also called the interim, is banning ballot harvesting. Believe it or not, in Wyoming, our statute is silent on ballot harvesting. I mean, we're in the year 2025, and this is a loophole that has not been closed. Unfortunately, the Senate refused to hear that bill on the floor. That bill went through committee, and the majority floor leader refused to put it on the list of bills to be heard. We also are hoping to bring through the ban on drop boxes. That was another bill that we brought through the House that was not brought on the floor by the majority floor leader. Drop boxes are mentioned nowhere in Wyoming state law. And astoundingly, some clerks have decided, and it is a distinct minority of clerks, have decided that out of thin air that they have the authority to place these ballot drop boxes outside. And it's very troubling to me. We've had a long conflict about this. I told Malcolm Urban, the Platte County clerk, we're just going to have to agree to disagree. But, you look at their reasoning on this, and basically it is inconsistent with the law. They say that it's local control. Well, I'm sorry, if the statute doesn't mention it, in all the other situations where they don't like something that I've done, they cite the statute. But then when they want to do something, they say that they're just granted the authority to just do it because of local control, which the statute actually says the opposite. The statute says that all areas that are ambiguous, the Secretary of State shall establish uniformity across counties, shall provide for uniformity in administration of the election code. So really, the fact that we've been clear in a directive that they are not allowed, that should win the day. But we've decided to go to the legislature with that flouting of the directive and them deciding to move forward with that to explicitly ban the drop boxes, even though it's not even mentioned in statute. So it's interesting to explicitly ban something that isn't even in the code, in the election code, Title 22. But that's where we're at because we have
if someone brought a law to change that to protect ballot
boxes. We
boxes.
have an attorney general that works at the pleasure of the governor that isn't enforcing these laws. So we have got to ban the ballot drop boxes, and we're going to request the
protect voting rights
committee to take that bill up, and I'm very hopeful
so that we don't have voter suppression, so that there needs to be legislation to protect ballot boxes.
Second point I want to make. First point is we're moving forward on election integrity. We're advancing the ball. We are the leader in implementing President Trump's executive order, by the way, which the lead on that was proof of citizenship for registering to vote on the federal form. Now, Wyoming is one of the 6 states that is exempt from the federal form. That dates to the early 90s, but we've already done proof of citizenship with the bill that we passed in the legislative session. So we're good there. It's just that at the federal level, they are, through the SAVE Act and the executive order, working to bring forward what we have done here in Wyoming. And we're looking forward to partnering with them with the Election Assistance Commission, which has the authority, which they've asked them to change the federal form on. Unfortunately, we have another rogue judge. I mean, we've seen last Thursday, we saw what happened. One day, 2 rogue judges, one enjoining a nationwide injunction, one judge invalidating nationwide, which is a total flouting of having different district court judges, different appeals courts in different geographic jurisdictions in our nation. In one day, you had a federal court judge who enjoined an executive order saying that sanctuary cities aren't going to get federal funding. It's already illegal to be a sanctuary city. That's the definition of it. And so the administration is merely attempting to enforce what is already federal law. And you have a judge that's enjoining that. Same thing with the election integrity executive order, where already, as the left often points out, it is illegal for a non-citizen to vote. It is also illegal for a non-citizen to falsely attest on the form that they are a qualified elector, meaning they can vote. The executive order is enforcing federal law by setting up a procedure where we can have an upfront method of providing for proof of citizenship for registering to vote. That is totally consistent. It's not only consistent, it is in line with an attempt to enforce federal law and the United States Constitution. And yet we have a Clinton appointee that, with a snap of a finger, is enjoining that portions, not all of it, but portions of that executive order. That executive order also ensures that foreign funding of elections is going to be prosecuted. It asks the DOJ to prioritize that. It encourages and mandates federal agencies to work with chief election officials like myself across the country in sharing voter list maintenance procedures so that we can use the SAFE system to check on citizenship status. We can check on Social Security system, on residency, and on citizenship status. And so all of those things are in line with what we've been working with on and election integrity measures. So we truly are in the halcyon days, not only at the federal level, but at the state level in working to advance election integrity. Oh, and by the way, and I know there's more coming. President Trump said there's more coming. There's a lot on pushing back on a lot of these tabulators in the executive order. So it says that you can't have barcodes. It asks the Election Assistance Commission to change their guidelines so that barcodes are not allowed, so that it's pen to paper ballots. That one was not enjoined last Thursday, so that's moving forward. And he said there is more to come, and I know there's more to come. And so it's very interesting because a lot of the insiders and the media said, oh, this election integrity agenda is so out of line. No, it's the mainstream. In fact, if you look at it, literally go point by point with what we put forward for this 2025 general session. It aligns with the Protecting Elections executive order that the president signed. We're going to continue working with the administration on that. Point two I want to make tonight. We are really at an inflection point in working to advance our core industries. And I sit on the State Board of Land Commissioners with the other 4 statewide electeds, and we saw 3 weeks ago this attempt to attack our core industries being brought forward with this wind lease that is proposed in Converse and Niobrara counties. Now, let's first start from 30,000 feet up with what they want to do, because it's pretty wacky. First of all, it's a Spanish company. Now, you see what happened on Monday where Spain didn't have power, what was it, 20 hours, Portugal? The whole Iberian Peninsula. That's true net. That's net zero for you. I mean, it's totally dark. The whole Iberian Peninsula. Zero power. So a Spanish company wants to come in and plop down wind turbines. And it's not just wind power they want to do. They're going to take the wind power and then they're going to make hydrogen using a process that is very water intensive, which obviously is a huge resource in Wyoming. And then they're going to use water to make sustainable jet fuel. I thank you for laughing, because I think it is truly a joke. What exactly? And then it's so inefficient. That's why you're laughing. It's very inefficient. And then they're going to pipe it down to DIA, to Denver International Airport, so the woke billionaires going to Davos can say that they're sustainable when on their little merry-go-round trips around the world. Or United Airlines can put on their investor prospectuses that they're ESG friendly so that BlackRock and company will get off their backs or whatever. And so it's all driven by a fantasy. The subsidies at the federal level, the demand is, there's no economic demand here. This is attempting to satiate a political fantasy. People that want to feel good that they're somehow net zero oriented. When you look at the inputs on this, it's totally inefficient. It's actually the opposite of green. So I was the only member of that State Board of Land Commissioners to vote against those leases. And I view those leases as totally inconsistent with our fiduciary duty. It shows you the insider class down there in Cheyenne, and they're all a part of it. This governor, the auditor who does what, pretty much votes with the governor 100% of the time, the treasurer, and Megan Degenfelder too. They all, despite countless citizens from Converse and Niobrara counties coming in and saying they're opposed to this, they went ahead with it. And it's inconsistent with our fiduciary duty as members of the State Board of Land
Grace
Commissioners.
against Degenfelder.
Stay tuned on it, because you think about our opportunity right now to reach our full potential with our core industries. Finally, and I'm proud of this because I think the governor kind of was responding to the fact I was talking about creating a working group on exporting our coal, on getting new markets for our coal. He finally last week started to get with the program. Back to 2019 when I was a member of the legislature, brought a bill to sue the state of Washington for blocking our coal export rights, and he vetoes it. His first 60 days, you think about the first 100 days of Trump versus the first 100 days of Gordon. First 100 days of Gordon in 2019, he vetoes a bill where we are trying to assert our coal export rights. This is how radical this Gordon has gotten. And then we remember what happened in the summer of 2019 with the Black Jewel mines going bankrupt. We have seen how the fact that Cheyenne is not doing all they can to advance our industries, what that means on the ground, that we are not able to reach our full potential with our God-given resources. And I can tell you, it's very offensive to me. One of the reasons I got involved in public life is I wanted to help people reach their full God-given potential. When we aren't able to mine, use the resources that God has blessed us with, we aren't able to reach our full potential. Now, the governor now is starting to say that he's looking at exporting out of the Gulf of America. Stay tuned, though. I don't believe anything that comes out of his mouth until he gets it done. But he is starting to say that he's meeting with...
I don't think God has anything to do with mining.
I'm hopeful that maybe we can get some access to new markets. And 7 years into this Mark Gordon term, we can finally get some movement forward in getting new markets for our coal. Third thing I wanted to discuss is attacking fraud with business registrations here in Wyoming. And we worked with the Joint Corporations Committee in a suite of bills. It's new sheriff in town. When I entered office, we began dissolving entities that had filed false claims in their paperwork with our office in terms of their business registrations. That was a process that had never been used by my predecessors. So if entities are using false addresses or using false registered agents, we are now dissolving those entities. And we dissolved entities that we had evidence were tied to North Korea. So we took on Kim Jong-un and we won. And so we dissolved those entities, and we also got explicit authority in state law so that we can dissolve any entities that are tied to foreign adversaries of the United States. So we don't need to prove fraud or anything. If they're tied, owned or operated or controlled by a foreign adversary, we can dissolve those. So we're really trying to take on fraud with our business registrations. So I think I'm going to leave it there for now. I'm looking forward to vibrant Q&A. We're working hard on election integrity. The crossover bill that we passed in 2023, banning the crossover voting, really bore fruit, I think, in the 24 elections. And we saw this conservative majority that was elected in 24. We worked with them to do great things, the conservative majority in the House. There's more we can do for the 26th session, and we'll work with the Joint Interim Committee on that. We need to reach our full potential with our resources and attack this sort of woke wind agenda that this Mark Gordon is putting forward, this woke wind and solar agenda that he's putting forward, and we are working to attack business fraud in our office. So with that, and then we got two other speakers, and we're going to open it up with Q&A. I am so excited to turn it over to one of my dear friends, a really hard worker, somebody I have a lot of respect for, former chairman of the Freedom Caucus, Representative John Barrett.
Thank you, Chuck. Hey, folks, let's give it up for Lieutenant Governor. Very tough act to follow, and I want to get to the Q&A as quickly as we can. We got a lot of folks out here that would like to talk, I'm sure, and would like to ask us questions, and we're really ready to answer those questions. We'd like to do that, and I want to get Chris up here, the chairman of corporations, which had a great deal to do with all of that stuff you just heard from the Secretary of State. I did work on that House Bill 156, which eventually became what we know as the SAVE Act here in Wyoming, and it was a real honor to do it. I think Chuck and I worked together, meeting about weekly for over a year, and I don't know who grew tired of who first, but we managed to make it through. We really worked through that bill. It actually started out as two different bills, and that ended up getting combined over the Senate, but a lot of work went into it, a lot of chewing our nails, worried about what might happen at the next stage, but we got it through. Even though we had to wait 15 days at the end for the governor, that was a little hard on my heart, but we made it. And that was the first state in the nation to pass the SAVE Act. And folks, I can't add to what Chuck said as far as why this is important, but it is. And we're going to keep working on it. We have some great things that we're working on during the interim, and I'm going to get to those in just a second. But I want to take just a moment to just celebrate the wins that we had. Chuck talked about a lot of those that were in his priorities, and of course, our number one priority in that 5 and dime was the SAVE Act, that proof of citizenship and proof of residency. And the reason it was number one in ours was because we did a poll, and you can access that poll on our website, WyomingFreedomCaucus.com. And that poll told us what the people of Wyoming were really looking for. And of course, we knew that also when we, being told that's a lie that it's on our website or something that we did poll you all, but we did poll people.
Didn't poll me.
And we also went door to door, and we had town halls just like this, which made it pretty clear what people really want in the state of Wyoming. And election security is at the top. So that was our number one bill. We also wanted to help as much as we could in the state with border security. That was a huge issue for the people of Wyoming. And so we managed to do that. On the election integrity issue, we passed 14 election integrity bills out of the House. Now, 4 of those, as the Secretary just said, became law, but 14 out of the House. On that border security, we passed 2 bills on border security, and both of them became law. And the biggest one there was on the 5 and dime, and that was to invalidate driver's licenses from blue states like California that say that illegals can have a driver's license. So when they come to the state of Wyoming, they won't be able to use those to drive, they won't be able to use those to vote, and that's very important. So we passed those. We passed 5 different anti-woke education bills. 4 of those became law this year. The House passed 3 anti-woke investing bills. 2 of those became law. We passed 4 tax relief and reform bills. 1 of those became law, and hopefully you're starting to see that on your tax bill that you just got, not your bill, but your assessment. Everybody, if you look in the bottom right-hand corner, you should see a significant savings, 25% for everyone. And again, this is the first year that you can get that 50% off if you're a long-term homeowner in the state of Wyoming. We're going to try to continue to extend that so that continues for as far as we can see. We also passed 3 school choice bills. 2 of those became law, and we now have universal school choice in the state of Wyoming. That is a huge, huge thing, folks. And you know, often we talk about how that's great for parents and the children, so they've got options to learn the best way that they can learn. But I'll tell you what, I think it's the best thing for the teachers. And I'll tell you why. Because now the teachers don't have only one place they can go get a job. As this industry grows and there's more options, the teachers will have options as well. And when you have options, you can demand more for your salary. That superintendent of your district doesn't have complete monopoly over those employees. So I look forward to that. That's a great opportunity for our teachers as well. We also passed 2 child safety bills, and 1 of those became law. We passed 8 DOGE bills out of the House. 8 of those, and 1 of those became law. 3 pro-life bills, 2 of those became law. 2 pro-Second Amendment bills, 1 of those became law. And we passed 2 medical freedom bills. Unfortunately, neither of those made it through the Senate, but we did pass 2 of them out of the House, so we're getting momentum, folks. We're getting closer to outlawing mandates on vaccines and masks. So that's where we're going with this stuff, folks. And, so now just briefly, I want to tell you where we're headed into the interim, and I'm just going to touch on it. I think Chris may be able to go into more detail on some of the things he's working on, but we're focusing on our state spending, folks. We're going to be doging a lot more through the state of Wyoming, looking for things where it's not what we think the people would be happy with the state of Wyoming spending on, or where it's just fraud, waste, and abuse, folks. We're going to do a deep dive on that in our next budget, and you'll see some great things come out of that. What else? We're also going to be working on repealing what is called House Bill 200 from 2020, and that is these carbon sequestration standards that we're putting on our own power plants here in Wyoming.
Amen.
What does that mean for you? That means right now you're paying higher electric bills because these power companies are planning on the day that they have to have carbon sequestration, carbon capture and sequestration on the power plants, and they're going to pass that, and they are passing that on to you right now. So your higher power bills should be affected in a better way if we can get something done on that. We're going to be working on that during the interim. We're also working on property tax reform. We passed a bill out of the House that would change your property tax to be based on what you paid for it versus what your neighbors are paying for it. That's called acquisition value, what you acquired it for. And so that passed out of the House, and we're going to keep working on that and trying to get that to where that's where we're headed. Personally, and I was quoted in the Gillette news record for this, I would like to see property tax go away entirely. The thing about that is we've got to work towards that. This is an intermediate step, and we're going to work on this first. We will need to change the Constitution, so it's going to be on your ballot someday to get rid of property taxes. So keep asking your legislators for that, keep pushing for it, and we'll get it there. We're also going to work on school discipline. We need to get it to where the teachers can control their classrooms.
That's right.
And so we're going to be working on that. And that's a tall order, except one of the things that the Obama administration did is they brought DEI into school classroom discipline. And so I can't think of another thing that could be more unconstitutional than determining how you're going to discipline a child based on some immutable immutable feature like their skin color.
We don't do that. We don't.
It's an Obama
We don't.
initiative.
It's a lie. I'm a teacher. It's a lie. We don't do that. We do not. We do not do that. I'm a teacher right now. It's a lie.
Figure out.
Yes, fine. Kick me out, but that is a lie. We do not discipline that way in schools. We don't.
And you know, I'll just address that.
That's a bald-faced lie.
There are things that may or may not happen down at the bottom level, okay, in the classroom. But if they're law, and we're following the law, what should be happening in the classroom?
Discipline.
Whatever the law is.
We discipline.
Right? And if the law is unconstitutional, that's our job.
We have diversity. And we have equity as part. Equity is.
This isn't time for questions.
Yeah, but I cannot sit here.
Excuse me,
It's all right.
we'll have questions afterwards, if you can just put
Gosh.
that away.
You guys
You'll
are
have
being
your
misinformed.
opportunity.
You're being lied to.
So it's not a lie. The Obama administration passed DEI for discipline in the classroom. Yes. And we're going to make that so that cannot happen in Wyoming. Is it happening here? I don't know. Maybe it's not. I'll take her word for it.
Yeah, you guys
We're
are
gonna
not
make sure
teachers.
the
You're
law
not in the
does
classroom, and you don't have kids in the
law can never
classroom.
be
You're not the
enforced.
speaker right now either.
Right? Okay. Go ahead.
Escort.
Okay. Okay. So this is bad.
Ma'am, you'll have an opportunity afterwards. It is, but afterwards.
Questions?
All right. I'll be quiet.
She's right.
Yeah, she's fine. We're going to have Q&A.
Out of line.
But I did clarify, folks, that it is the law of the land, and it hasn't been repealed since Obama did, okay? And so we're going to do what we can at the state legislature to take care of that. We're going to work on that this summer. That's one of the things, but we do need to make sure that discipline is happening in the classroom. Okay? And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Representative Knapp and let him give you more details about what we've been talking about. But he worked extremely hard this last session. His committee went past midnight multiple times getting this legislation passed that we've been talking about tonight. And I want to thank you all for being here. The protesters, I love you. This is a time when I'm excited. I feel like I'm somehow kind of like Harry Cageman. Thank you all very much. Looking forward to Q&As.
All right, so our next member up is another person that I just have really enjoyed working with, and I just truly respect him. So much wisdom, and he's also firm. He's very strong, and that is Representative Chris Knapp, Chairman Chris Knapp, Chairman of the Joint Corporations Committee.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for inviting us. I'm a little under the weather tonight, so if I do have an answer you don't agree with, it's the cough medicine. But like John said, I always forget, he probably does have the hardest working committee on appropriations. I always say nothing good happens after midnight, but sometimes it does. So I'm chairman of corporations. We had a multitude of election bills go through this year, as John mentioned. We had about 17 that did not quite make it through, whether they were held up by the Senate or during the process. So we'll be looking at some of those, prioritizing those, and making sure that we have those going through. Pen to paper ballots is one of them. The other one is ballot drop boxes. And typically, you look at a situation, and a lot of people will say, well, we don't have problems here in Maryland. We don't have the fraud. And the point is looking at it similarly to a bank security. If banks around you got robbed, that doesn't mean you don't have security. You take a look at what systems you have in place, what processes you have in place to keep your bank secure. And I think that's the way I look at Wyoming. I look at three things when it comes to election integrity. One is your right to vote. That is number one paramount, and that's what we usually hear from the press. That's what we usually hear from opposition, is you cannot disenfranchise somebody's right to vote, and I believe in that. But there's two other factors that are equally important. The second factor is the ability to make sure that that vote is secure. So as it goes through the process, whether it's a ballot drop box, whether it's something else, you want to make sure that that ballot is secure. And finally, the ability to audit it. So if you have an election that somehow doesn't seem quite right, or somebody challenges, that you have the ability to go back and audit that election. So those are the three things that I look at. And to me, disenfranchising a vote is equally as important as not allowing somebody to vote. So when you have illegals with the possibility of voting, which would counterbalance your vote, that is a disenfranchisement, a true disenfranchisement, because they are not a citizen of the United States. So those are the things that I look at when it comes to elections. And I think we've done a good job at kind of looking at those steps that we need to take to ensure that they're secure, that you have a right to vote, and that we have election integrity. Okay? So we'll be coming up with those over the session. Ballot drop boxes is one of my favorites to talk about because it's nowhere in statute, as Secretary Gray mentioned, number one. We only have about 5 to 6 counties that do it. Those 5 to 6 counties don't do it similarly. So one may have a drop box that they put everything from child support enforcement payments in to other things that go into the courthouse. And you have a multitude of people sometimes looking at that box to get what they need out of it. So it's better to have something that is consistent and secure than to have anomalies out there that aren't in statute. And that's simple to me. So the other committee that I'm on is minerals. Minerals, we did some amazing things for Campbell County this year. One, we lowered the severance tax again on coal. We made it equal to oil and gas, so that it's not an industry that's penalized just because it brings in revenue, right? So that's been equalized. The second thing is, you saw in the Biden administration where they raised the cost of bonding for oil and gas producers. And this especially hit hard for the small producers, which makes up a very large percentage of our income in small producers. So the Minerals Committee worked with a group, and we basically came up with a pooling option, which we had one for coal before, but we came up with a pooling option where it's affordable bonding that they can do. And as they fund that, as they participate in that, it becomes self-funding into the future. And so that helps our industry in oil and gas. The one bill that John had mentioned, HB 200, I brought, which was a repealer of a bill that basically kind of was a double-edged sword, in my opinion. It basically said, because we want all the coal-fired power plants to look at what they can accomplish without closing early, we're going to require them to have a plan or to have in place a carbon sequestration project that will go right alongside their coal-fired power plant. Sounds good. In reality, what that does is increases cost of coal-fired power plants. It increases cost of fossil fuel power, which is cheap, affordable, dispatchable energy. So it tells a company that you need to put a project that's tens of billions of dollars, by the way, to see if it works. And if it does work, then you need to build a plant to make it truly functional. $500 million up to $1 billion next to a coal-fired power plant. And then the bill went further and said, and we will allow you to charge back the end user. So as we changed administrations, this was an opportune time. I brought this bill before, but this was an opportune time to say, look, a new administration is here. They are fair across the board. They believe in baseline energy, dispatchable, cheap, affordable energy. They're not going to take money and basically dole it out to, as Chuck said, some fantasy type of operations. You look at solar, the largest solar producer has gone out of business as far as solar panels. Largest wind energy has gone out of business. And if you look at the industry and the foresight of the industry, they're basically saying, because there's no more subsidies, we're done. If you don't continue to fund us so that we can equal the cost by the subsidies, we're done. Or if you don't continue to punish coal and punish oil and gas to get their costs up to equal ours, we're done. But when it comes to the end user, that's what's important. For our committee, we hear the increases that are asked for every year. And in the last 5 years, it's upwards of 30% or more. So just the sequestration piece allows them to put an additional 2% increase on every single year. That's what that allows. Take that over time, that's a very big increase in your costs. So we're going to fight on that, and honestly this year, it sailed through the House. We got to the Senate side, and we heard from our governor's office against it. We heard from some of the lobbyists against it. We've heard from the Power Commission against it. And so you see what you're up against sometimes when you're just trying to do the right thing for the people and make sure that our industries are protected. So we'll continue to do that. Management audit, I'm also chairman of that this year. And management audit is basically looking at processes and procedures, auditing them to make sure that they're functioning properly, that we're auditing properly. So we'll see that in our the RAINS Act that came through. Basically it said, look, if you write a bill and it requires further explanation or further rules, that we have to come back and look at those rules, see how much they actually cost, and approve them to ensure that that bill is doing what it was meant to do. So I always say it holds the legislator accountable, because if you write a bad bill, it ends up in a lot of rules. And so it forces us to come back and say, was this bill doing what it was intended to do, and what is the cost of that in rules and regulations? So that's what that allows us to do. And it'll be a fun interim. It was a fun session. Very productive, probably one of the most productive I've ever seen. I heard from a lot of you. One of the reasons I love town halls is because I see a lot of faces that I know that are very dear to me. Relationships are everything. We don't see eye to eye on every issue. You know, we can be polar opposites on some issues. But those people that call me are respectful. We talk, they listen. ESG was a perfect example. Started off the year with the ESG bill. I spent an entire weekend on the phone and changing the bill, amending the bill, and making sure that it was something that we could live with, that still accomplished everything, but satisfied those people out there that were scared to death of their retirement fund. But once they understood what it was about, it solved their fears. So I'm glad you come. I'm looking forward to the questions, but I always remember it's the relationships that I have with people first. My principles, obviously, are involved in every decision that I make, but I'm willing to explain my vote to anybody, and usually there's a very good reason for it. And if we sit down and talk about it, maybe you'll learn something, maybe I'll learn something, but that's the whole point of this. So thank you.
All right, well, 7 p.m., we hit the hour on the dot, so we've got a good hour for Q&A, at least. I think you said 8:05 we got to be out, or 8:15? We're going to...
8 o'clock strong.
Okay, we hit the 7 o'clock on the dot, so very well. So let's go ahead and dig into Q&A. Yes, the gentleman in the back.
Actually, the way we do it is I'll be back here. I have the microphone.
Okay.
So they can come right over here.
Okay, we got
and
to...
just line up, and we'll go one at a time. Thank you for spending your evening with us, Secretary Gray.
Thanks for coming.
And my name is Vicki Swenson.
Yes.
And House Bill 106 reduced early voting period from 42 to 28 days. You came out very strongly in favor of this reduction. And would you please share with us, one, what problems the opponents see with shortening this voting period? And two, why did you personally support it? Thank you.
Well, thanks for that question. Now, it wasn't House Bill 156 where we shortened it. It was actually a vehicle in 2023. It was a bill in 2023. It was actually a Senate file that Senator Boner brought. And it shortened the absentee period from 45 to 28 days. That was a very important bill. We were tied for longest in the nation on our early voting period. And it presented a lot of problems. For one, all the information isn't out there. I mean, there are so many times, a lot of times it's false information, but sometimes it's true information. Things that come out as the campaign continues. I always joked around, when we ran for Secretary of State in 2022, we were ahead. The polling showed that, and people were calling me. They said, "Chuck, you got this. You're in good shape." And I told them, I said, "No, the media will come up with something 2 weeks before the election. You watch." And literally 15 days before the election, I got a call from the Red Star Tribune Prop on the Platte that a complaint had been filed on a federal election entity when I was running for Congress that I had taken straw donations. Totally false. One person filed a complaint, and suddenly it ended up on the front page of every single paper in the entire state. Amazing, the tactics that the radical left uses and the false statements they make. That being said, there are a lot of times are true things that come out in the last weeks of the campaign. And so it's important to have to not have this period that goes on and on and on for months. And having Wyoming tied for the longest absentee period in the nation, it created problems for the clerks. And look, we aren't in alignment all the time, but the clerks were in agreement that we should reduce the absentee period and get it closer to what other states are doing, what other jurisdictions are doing, and something that's reasonable. And 28 days was a very modest reduction. A lot of states have 10 days, 14 days. I mean, you just saw the Canada election that happened. I mean, they have very little early voting. It's been sort of the left that has been pushing this early voting narrative over the last two and a half decades. I remember when I was a kid in the 90s that, you'd have maybe 15% absentee votes. And at that time, the absentee voting was very Republican. It was people that were truly working and out of the state or out of the jurisdiction on the election. And there was this sort of control on it. Even if it wasn't explicit that you had to provide an excuse, it was limited. And it's just grown so much in the last 2.5 decades. The 45-day requirement had only been in state law since, I believe, 2014. And they mainly put it in place to align with the UACAVA period. UACAVA voting is for members of our military and those that are overseas. And it was mainly to put us in alignment with that. But over time, it really wasn't necessary for us to be on the same federal procedure that is in place for a very limited part of the population that is handled by this federal law. So UACAVA wasn't touched. That 45-day requirement is in federal law. That's still in place. But for everybody else, we just got it closer to an equilibrium, something that's more reasonable. And was proud to work with the clerks and the state legislature on that issue. Yeah. You want to add?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Some of us were kids in the 60s. I just wanted to add that.
Secretary Gray, thank you for coming here.
Thanks for being here.
Voter fraud is very rare in this state. The Heritage Foundation found that there have been 4 instances of voter fraud in the last 42 years, and they were all committed by U.S. citizens. Why is there a need for new rules and regulations on voting?
Well, thank you for that question, because it is a trope of the left, and I don't blame you for seeing it repeated so much. And you see something repeated enough times, it's very easy to start believing. And so I don't blame you at all. I blame the media and the left that has this infrastructure that controls the legacy media, that controls the information that is out there, and
a better argument than that.
Tries to inculcate in people's minds these false claims. I feel like I could write a book about this. In my 10 years involved in public life, I've seen it so many times. And this is one of them. I mean, this Heritage Foundation database, Heritage does great work. But, it's right there on the page. These are only convicted cases of voter fraud that they have found. Oftentimes it's a media report. So if it's not in the media, they don't put it on the list. And one of the cases, which you just said wasn't on the list because it was an illegal alien that voted in Campbell County, was in 2020, before my time in office. But it was not prosecuted. The individual had been deported, and I'm disappointed that, I thought the county attorney could have been a little more vigorous on this. But that aside, that is an honor.
So it was handled.
And all the complaints that I get that I forward to the Attorney General, there has been reporting on this. We had over 20 complaints that I forwarded to the Attorney General for prosecution. You know how many have been prosecuted? 0. And that's just from the 2024 cycle. So how many cases are there of fraud across time that were not prosecuted? That's not going to be on the Heritage list. It also sort of gets to this logical fallacy that the left puts out there. And I was the lead on the voter ID bill in 2021. When I got in the state legislature, we didn't even have voter ID. And what originally got me working on election integrity was passing the voter ID law in 2021, House Bill 75, very historic. It was a great bill. We worked hard on it. The clerks fought us 2018, 2019, 2020. They won, and then 21, we finally got it through, and the people won when they backed down and agreed to support that. But it makes me laugh when I think back to that debate. ARP and many of the people that didn't want that bill would say, well, what's your proof of voter impersonation?
Exactly. What is it?
And I would tell them, how can I have proof when the procedure to identify voter impersonation isn't in place? It's a circular argument. I was trying to put into place in state law, and we ended up winning on this, a procedure that would identify and be a deterrent for cases of voter impersonation. There was no way of identifying voter impersonation when you don't have a voter ID requirement. And yet the main argument that the media and the insiders would use to try to stop this would be to say, well, how many cases have you been able to prove of this? And how on earth do we prove it when you don't have an upfront method of verification? I can't just wave a wand and know when someone's going to try to impersonate somebody and be at the polls at that moment of time when 75% of people are voting simultaneously on one day across the state with vast distances. I mean, it's just some of the arguments that are made on this, they aren't logical. And I think this is another example of that. So appreciate it. Glad I was able to work with you on dispelling it, because it is one of the challenges we have. I call it the Troika. It's a coalition, the insiders, the media, and the Democrats. And they just repeat these lines over and over and over and over again. And they coordinate. I'm positive on it, because they're so in tune and in lockstep on what their talking points are. And this is one of the ones they've really hammered on, and I'm happy to answer that question, because I think we have a great answer to it.
I'd like to talk to you later about that, but there's a lot of other
Okay,
people that
thank
want
you.
questions.
Hi, I'm Heidi Kennedy, Secretary of Green. 1 in 10 American citizens do not have ready access to their citizenship documents. This would disenfranchise approximately 21.3 million U.S. citizens. What specific steps is your office taking to ensure compliance while also addressing voter concerns about voter access for women and other U.S. citizens whose legal names do not match their birth certificate?
Well, let's take the second one first, because this is another trope that the media's put out there, and I appreciate being able to dispel this. I did a whole video on this in front of the U.S. Capitol. I was out there the week they passed the SAVE Act, and this Alyssa Slotkin, a very liberal senator, went on Fox News and said and repeated this claim that maiden names on birth certificates or other government documents aren't going to be allowed for proof of citizenship for registering to vote. And I have a challenge, I said this on the video, for Alyssa Slotkin or anybody that is putting forward this claim. I want them to identify one line in the SAVE Act or in House Bill 156, and we have copies of at least 156. Show me one line that says that maiden names on birth certificates or other government documents will not be allowed for registering to vote. Show me one line. Just one line, Alyssa. And Alyssa, this Alyssa Slotkin isn't going to be able to identify it because it doesn't exist. There's nothing in there on it. And it's a total false claim. They know that now, why do they do this? Why do they bring forward these sort of false claims and try to place them in the mind of the American people? Because they know these are widely popular, and they have to come up with something to try to blunt that popularity. Gallup released a poll. Over 80% of Americans supporting proof of citizenship for registering to vote. Rasmussen, over 90% of Americans supporting proof of citizenship for registering to vote.
No.
When you get to 80, 90%,
No.
I could he's taking so many photos, very thorough. I love it. I hope you choose the good ones, because I'm sure there's a couple of bad ones.
I think a lot of these are.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if you need my advice on them, here's my card. Because I'm good at identifying the good ones. It's not easy to take a good photo of these, so I really appreciate that you're trying to get it.
It has a really nice light.
Right. I'm all right. I'm not. Thank you. Over 90% of Americans, Gallup, Rasmussen, shows support proof of citizenship for registering vote. When you get to 90%,
No.
you're not just talking about supermajorities of Republicans and independents. You're talking about supermajorities of Democrats, or majorities of Democrats at least, and supermajorities of Republicans and independents. And the sort of AOC, Alyssa Slotkin, Bernie Sanders group in the Congress is so out of touch, even with their own party. That's why they don't have primaries anymore, the Democrats don't. That's why they anoint Kamala or anoint Biden or whatever. Because if they have primaries, even their own base isn't in alignment on so many of these issues with them. And that's why they have to make up these sort of claims. And it's sad to see people that, I'm glad that I'm so glad you came, because I think we can work to dispel them and hopefully calm that fear that isn't built on anything. And so I think the first one, what was the first one again? Oh, on the documents. Okay, getting documents. So with House Bill 156, do you have a Wyoming license?
Yep.
You're fine. That's going to check all three boxes: identity, citizenship, and residency.
I'm not worried about myself. I'm not worried about myself. I have a marriage certificate, I have a birth certificate, I have a Wyoming driver's license. But there's other people that don't.
Who? Who in Wyoming?
Who doesn't have a
My wife,
Driver's license.
You don't have a license? She doesn't have a license?
she doesn't have her marriage, she doesn't have her.
No, does she have a license? License is fine.
Not everyone has a
License will
license.
be okay. You have a
Not
license,
everyone
right?
has a driver's license.
Me?
Yeah.
Yes, I have a driver's license.
Okay, you're good.
I'm not worried about myself, I'm worried about others.
That don't have driver's licenses. That don't have a driver's license.
But they should have an
I'm
ID.
just asking, what steps are you going to make sure that people have those documents, or that...
If they don't have a driver's license.
I'm for, I understand, I don't want non-citizens to vote either. I agree with you on that. I'm just worried about disenfranchising citizens from voting because they don't have the documents they need. What is the Wyoming Secretary of State and his office doing to make sure people have those documents?
Great question. One of the things we did on House Bill 75 voter ID, we inserted a provision in there that individuals that don't have a driver's license can get a Wyoming ID for voting purposes free of charge, that has the same security procedures, that is Real ID compliant, meaning it will check all three boxes: identity, residency, citizenship. And then for individuals who are not able to attain that, there are the other documents that are allowed. But yes, we have a Wyoming ID that is free of charge, that has the security methods in place for us to attain those three boxes for registering to vote after 156 is passed. Thank you.
First, I want to thank Representative Baird, Knapp, and Secretary Gray. It's awesome to see you guys.
Thank you. Thanks for coming. Thanks for coming out on a Wednesday, and they're doing incredible.
Great job, guys. My name is Rolf Arendt. Secretary Gray, quick question. You recently posted on X, and I'm going to try not to laugh again when I ask this question, comparing, I believe, Mark Gordon to Vivek Ramaswamy. Do you recall that post?
Yeah, that got a little traction.
Can you
A
talk
little bit. I wish I got more.
Can you talk some more about that?
Yeah. Thanks for asking that, because you were reading my mind. Because it came up a little bit, the REINS Act, and I was like, oh, darn it, I didn't bring that up. In the Wyoming State Legislature, in the 2025 session, one of the bills that was brought forward, it was alluded to in the introductory remarks, it's called the REINS Act. Very basic law. Very basic, in line with our conservative values, and pushing back on the administrative state. And it says that if a rule that is brought forward by an agency goes over a certain dollar cost threshold, that the legislature will have an opportunity to pass an order of the House reviewing the rule and potentially invalidating the rule. Now, you go back for decades, and it's not just me saying it, it's the media saying this. Guess the only one the governor has to sign all rulemakings, even those that are brought forward by electeds that run agencies like the treasurer or myself. There's only one in decades that have been invalidated. It actually was 3, but it's all from one person. And guess whose that was? What's that? It was the rules that we brought forward on pushing back on ESG, proof of residency for registering to vote, decades past. None of these rules imposing costs. Ours didn't impose any costs, but you would have agency rules that were like law, and they would just go through. The only ones that would get vetoed are the conservative ones, so that's Mark Gordon for you. So the legislature passed this bill, and Gordon went nuts. He was, McEwen's there, so he witnessed it. Senator McEwen, he had Randall Luthi, one of his advisors, running around the back of the Senate, running around like, he's chicken, just running around crazy when the legislature was trying to override that veto. Because the governor vetoed this bill that said that if a rulemaking had a cost over a certain point, the legislature was going to exercise its right to potentially veto that rule. And Gordon is so upset about it. Now, the Senate ended up overriding that veto. I think it was a 21-10 vote or something. It was like right on the dot of 2/3. And the House did it by a larger margin. Now, Gordon, so he was overridden, so the bill became law. Since then, Gordon has threatened. Now, he's not going to sign any rules because he wants to, as a protest, he's not going to sign any rules because of this new procedure for legislative oversight of his actions. Which my answer is, make my day. That might actually impose less costs on the people and improve our society. And, but anyway, it's just incredible some of the things he does. He's very upset about it. He was trying to get the legislature to not override his veto. And I posted on X, Vivek Ramaswamy, who's running for governor of Ohio, who is touting the REINS Act, who is saying this is what we need to be doing. And of course, Harriet Hageman and Republicans in Congress are trying to do the REINS Act at the federal level.
So boring.
This is not outside the bounds of a mainstream conservative idea that we're going to control the administrative state by having legislative oversight of rulemakings. But yet for Mark Gordon, he doesn't like it. In fact, he's going to veto a bill that does it, while Vivek is touting how when he becomes governor, and I'm very excited about him becoming governor of Ohio, that's going to be one of his main priorities, is passing the REINS Act. So it just shows you how out of touch this Gordon is, and the media can protect him all they want, but he is a true insider that doesn't have our conservative values. Anything you want to add? Okay. Thank you for that question.
Hi, I'm Janet Tharp, and this question is for Secretary Gray,
Yes.
and it is in regard to House Bill 156.
Yes.
And the bill reads, proof of residence means the documents or other proof of residence specified by rule of the Secretary of State, which rule identifies documents or other proof that establishes residency. So, is there a target date for you to announce what the rules are, or do those rules exist somewhere else in the statutes? And if so, what are they?
Well, we're in a huge colloquy with the governor on this. In fact, today I was taking phone calls because the appointed attorney general, the governor, we're one of the few states that has an appointed attorney general, so the attorney general is basically the governor's attorney. It's a very bad setup for a variety of reasons, and they're fighting us on. We put forward a rulemaking proposal, getting into the weeds on how rulemaking works in Wyoming, believe it or not, even for the electeds. Now, I can understand agency heads that aren't elected, but as an elected, I should be able to propose rules without gubernatorial permission. But amazingly, in Wyoming, state law, all agencies, even ones that are run by statewide electeds, I have to get permission to proceed, it's called. So I can't even promulgate the rule before I get permission from the governor to move forward with it. So I put this proposal on the governor's desk here a couple weeks ago, and he's been sitting on it and waiting and waiting. We've been calling and getting all this sweet talk that it's coming. And then today we get this massive email from the Attorney General with all sorts of claims that are false, and we had to debunk those in a response that I helped to prepare this afternoon after our Sundance town hall. So it's like everything with this Gordon. It's like pulling teeth. He is truly a liberal, and even documents for proof of residency that has passed the Wyoming State Legislature is controversial in his mind. I can tell you our rulemaking is very similar to the rulemaking we brought in 2023 that he vetoed, which was proof of residency for registering to vote, where we attempted by rule to do this very same thing. Now, when he vetoed it, we went to the legislature and got even further explicit statutory authority to do it. And once again, he's flouting it. And so it's, we're, at some point, we're going to put forward an emergency rule and see if he signs that. But we're waiting on him to give the quote-unquote permission to proceed so we can adopt that rulemaking. But we've been ready. We've been ready here now for almost a month, and he's just been slow rolling it, probably intentionally, although I can't get in their minds. But we're ready to go. And it's very similar to what we brought out in 2023. So,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I go back to that 2023 or 4 when the rulemaking was going on. And you all have an opportunity when that original rulemaking was going on to testify. I did, on behalf of my constituents, go and testify. And it was overwhelming. I know that the Secretary had a lot of written testimony as well that he received on what kind of IDs really were going to be the right thing to do, getting input from the people. And that process was at least, 90 days before you...
Yeah, it's 45 and then 90 to adopt.
So quite a bit of review. And then when the governor vetoed it, his letter said that the Secretary of State didn't have the authority to do that. I think that his job description as the chief election officer, that alone should have given him permission to write rules for a residency requirement. But this bill, 156, did exactly that. It gave him that authority to make those rules. So if some sort of ID anomaly happens in the future where it's either more difficult, which I can't imagine, or it's less difficult to get an ID, and we want to change the requirements, that we've given the Secretary of State that authority, and any future governor can't veto it saying he doesn't have that authority. So this bill did that as well. So we're trying to fix everything that this governor is saying is wrong with our statutes.
Well, and thanks, John, for adding that. He always has an excuse when he does these actions that aren't conservative. He always puts, no matter how nonsensical it is, he has to have an excuse because he knows that the media will pick up and treat that like it's gospel. So his excuse when there was no statutory authority for this, not only was there statutory authority for a proof of residency requirement, it actually was required in the statute because it says that there should be a procedure in place for verifying that all the information on the voter registration form is accurate and verified. And so one of the things you do when you sign the voter registration form is you attest that you're a qualified elector, which means that you're a Wyoming resident, in other words. And so it was just creating a procedure in place for verification of residency. The same thing as proof of identity, which is not in state law at all. Proof of identity was always in the Secretary of State's rules, and the insiders never challenged it. But when you get a conservative that is trying to get election integrity, they're not going to be consistent, and certainly the media isn't going to print that. So we decided to go to the legislature to further clarify that, and we got that done, and now he's still fighting us. And the list of excuses today, it's just like pulling teeth. I was on the phone with our council, and we were just we were getting the work done in responding, but we were also just kind of laughing because that's where we're at with this governor and his liberalism. So, thank you.
This is for Secretary Gray. My name is Terry Tharp. How are you going to reconcile the conflict between federal law which says there can be no state durational residency requirements in presidential and vice presidential elections, and the 30-day residential requirement contained in HB 156.
Well, that's another thing that this hasn't been so much the media. It's a little bit too in the weeds for the media to put out there because they're so surface level. But it is something that the legal community has been saying that is false. The NVRA and the Voting Rights Act of 1960 and the amendments to the Voting Rights Act of 1964 say that if you are voting for president or vice president and you do not meet the durational residency requirement in the state to which you have moved, you vote in the state from which you have come. So, for example, and there's a line of Supreme Court precedent that validates this. There are other states that have the same provision we have that have survived scrutiny. So, say you move from Minnesota to Wyoming and you haven't lived here 30 days. Yes, you are able to vote for president and vice president, but it is in the state from which you have come, so it would be in Minnesota. And that's what the Voting Rights Act guarantees. It is not a guarantee for voting to the state to which you have come.
I want you to take a look at 52 U.S. Code 10502. That was a 1970 amendment to the Voting Rights Act. And it specifically provides there shall be no state durational residency requirement in presidential and vice presidential elections. And if you need a copy of it, I've got one.
Let me read from you the judicial precedent. In Oregon v. Mitchell, Justice Stewart, in a concurrence, spoke to this issue specifically. Section 202, added by the Voting Rights Act amendments of 1970, is a comprehensive provision aimed at ensuring that a citizen will not be deprived of the opportunity to vote for the offices of president and vice president because of a change of residence. Those who take up a new residence more than 30 days before a presidential election are guaranteed the right to register and vote in the state to which they have moved, notwithstanding any durational residency requirement imposed by state law, provided, of course, that they are otherwise qualified to vote. That's more than 30 days. Now he gets to under 30 days. Those who take up a new residence less than 30 days before a presidential election are guaranteed the right to vote, either in person or by absentee ballot in the state from which they have moved, provided that they satisfied as of the date of their change of residence the requirements to vote in that state. So it's expressly addressed in the 1970 Oregon v. Mitchell case in Justice Stewart's concurrence.
There's another case out there, and I'm going to give you the cite to that. It's a later case, but that specifically provides that those durational residency requirements in state elections are for president and vice president are invalidated. And I've got that with me, and I'll gladly give it to you.
Yeah, we'll have dueling citations any day, but that's a Supreme Court citation, and so
this is a Supreme Court citation too.
Okay.
He's an attorney.
Well, certainly we'll take a look at it.
And a
Proof is in the pudding. I just produced it. I mean, we're actually debating this right now with our fair Attorney General and Governor. So, there are other states that do this, and Idaho does this. They have the same way of doing it, and it hasn't been challenged. Now, I can't stop a frivolous lawsuit from being filed, but this has been withstood scrutiny in numerous settings.
Well, I think you may be looking at a lawsuit. Another one.
Well, bring it on. Bring it on. I mean,
Well, I'm not going to bring it on.
Yeah.
There are people who will.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's a whole industry around false litigation. It's what we're seeing. The Trump administration is dealing with, and we have to stop this legal the weaponization of the legal system that we're seeing.
Separation of powers is a crime.
Well, I guess it's depends on who's doing the weaponization.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think proof is in the pudding on a nationwide injunction on enforcing federal law and stopping sanctuary cities. I mean, it's just astounding what we're seeing the federal courts do. But we're going to keep standing for the truth. We're not going to back down on these false claims when we have very clear judicial precedent backing up our way of doing things. On top of the fact that other states do it that way, it's good constitutional scrutiny. Yes. All right, we're all friends. It's okay.
My name is Dale Genoda, and I have a question dealing with integrity to the Secretary of State. About a year ago, there was a petition going around to have a proposition put on the ballot. What the issue was doesn't matter, but the signatures were collected at the post office, which federal law prohibits. I wrote to your office after you get everything in your hand, and I said to you, based on integrity, that it should be invalidated. This is a one-word answer. Did you invalidate it?
There's no provision in state law to invalidate a signature that is collected at a post office. Now, if there...
Federal law.
But it doesn't have a procedure for invalidation via the state legal process. Now, you were prolific in getting this in sort of a news source, and we responded to it. And we had AG backing on it, which is that, look, there's no procedure for invalidating a signature in Wyoming state law or the Wyoming state constitution. The federal law doesn't set out that procedure. Now, if there's a violation, you could forward that to federal authorities to look at, but the action there would be a prosecution on that violation. It's not an invalidation, and trying to invalidate legally qualified electors that have decided to sign a petition, it's very troubling. And it is a true bastardization of the code to say that that should be invalidated. Because it shouldn't.
You do recognize the federal law does prohibit it. Yes or no?
The federal law is a different issue, and it doesn't have any question on whether it would be allowed via state law or the Constitution. The Constitution lays out the initiative process, okay? The initiative process states that individuals can collect signatures and bring forward laws to the people of Wyoming, and that's how they brought forward the property tax case that will be on the ballot in 2026. But there is no procedure in federal or state law for a qualified signature that is attained at a post office to be invalidated. And it's very troubling that there are people that don't want qualified electors to be counted in that way.
Hi, thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. And it's not Halloween, so I don't mean to put you on the spot, but explain to me the premise of your costume. I want to understand it.
I think it was on my sign, but what I am worried about is voter suppression.
Yes.
And so our county clerks do a fantastic job in making sure and vetting voters. What I'm concerned about is I don't like a lot of laws, and I'm a registered Republican, and I believe that I don't like a lot of laws, and I feel that's what Republicans stand for, right? So every 2 years after that, if you don't vote, like if you didn't vote in the last election, then they purge your information. And I know that county clerks get their information. They know who dies, and they know who moves out of county or out of state. So why purge the voter registrations when I don't feel it's necessary? And why would you feel that's necessary? It's a lot more work. I just don't understand it.
It's Sherry, right?
Sure.
Thank you, Sherry. And I still don't, please, maybe afterwards you can explain to me, because I want to understand this hands made tail thing. I don't totally get it. And
It's
okay.
good. Yeah, it's good.
Well, is it pornographic? Because I'm not into the pornographic. But,
Then you wouldn't know what porn is then.
I'm not
You're not a judge of it.
not for the permits, but.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's a good question on the purge, and I appreciate the question. That has been in place in Wyoming state law since
He
the early
seriously say that they can
1970s.
still is porn?
And what it does is it's a voter list maintenance procedure. And it says that if you don't vote in the general election, you are removed, the individual is removed from the voter rolls. And so a lot of people, when I came into office, have been somehow saying our administration is somehow the lead on this. And while I defend that section of the state law, I think it is an important voter list maintenance procedure. It's been in place since the early 1970s, and it has been fascinating to watch the left sort of just recently get really animated on this. And the whole premise of this is that we want voter list maintenance. Just like, you have oral hygiene, we have to have voter list hygiene, is the word that is often used. And if an individual has moved, we have a very, there's transient populations that if they haven't voted in the general election, that's the premise behind that section of state law that says that they're removed from the voter rolls. And those individuals can re-register. And there is a voter education campaign that we've worked with the county clerks on to get the word out there about the list of individuals that have been removed from the voter list. But one of the reasons why we're not California, or we're not, like other states that have huge problems with their voter list, is because we do have a vigorous voter list maintenance process in that respect. We're actually, on other things, a little bit behind the 8 ball. But in terms of keeping clean lists for active individuals, people that have been active, we're really the strongest in the nation. And that's why that's there. And it dates to over 50 years ago, that being there.
I think you could do something about that.
Why?
Why?
I think it's an important part of the code. Yeah. And I do. I certainly, if the legislature wants to look at it, we can. I defend it. I always have defended that section of the code that has been there over 50 years for strong voter list maintenance, voter list hygiene protocols. Thank you.
Voter hygiene.
I don't know if it's okay for me to step in on this, but because I have worked with people around the country and all of that, Wyoming does have the cleanest voter rolls of the whole nation, and that's worked with people from all over the world.
And I'm super grateful for those clean voter rolls, but I just wanted to give you guys some evidence that I've run into as a candidate. So in both in 2019 or 2020 and then 2022 and then this last time in 2024, I've run into this, and it's rare, but it just shows that even though we have good, clean voter rolls, there's things that slip through the cracks. And what I ran into, you always run into people who sold their home, and you've got the old name there and not the new one. That's going to happen because people just sell their homes. And there's nothing that we can do in cleaning our voter rolls in between that time period until it's time to go vote again and somebody else registers at that address. But one thing that rarely happens is that somebody goes in and says, I've left the state, so take me off the voter rolls. So there's been at least one example, sometimes multiple examples, in each of those elections where there were 3 and 4 names of past owners on that home's voter registration. And that just shouldn't happen. You go talk to the person at the door, and there's three different names listed there, and
That doesn't equal.
a whole lot of people living there.
That does not
but actually,
equal
no, it's somebody that's not even
fraud.
one of those 3. Now that house had obviously turned over regularly, but to have 3 on there shows you that some things slip through the cracks.
Doesn't
I remember
mean that there
as a
is,
kid, when we were in school, they made us take those little red pills and put them in our mouth to see where we missed with our toothbrush. And so when we do this maintenance on a regular basis, you're going to get those caught a lot more often. You'll have a lot fewer of those. I can't imagine what it would be like in Michigan trying to go door to door and find out who's going to be at the door when you knock on it. So just wanted to let people know that we're not perfect, but we're trying to get better all the time.
Yeah, George Dunlap. I think this question probably is for Chris. Chris, question's for you. And I don't know, hope you're awake. I see these big wind turbines all around. I personally think they're very ugly. And I photographed underneath them. I went down and photographed underneath them. A lot of times there's tremendous amount of oil and stuff underneath them. And yeah, a lot of dead birds, lots and lots of dead birds. But the question I got is there's the big turbines, and down in Casper they're digging holes and burying them. Do those companies have to put up a bond or something to get rid of that stuff? You know, the coal mines have to have reclamation, and the oil, they have to put up, you know, a bond. Does the state require the people to do something about that, or are we just letting them get off free and clear?
So the answer to that is because you touched a lot of things in your comment. There is a bond. But wind energy, those blades are